Welcome to Haywood Junction, near the county town of Stafford, where the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal meets the Trent Mersey Canal. Yesterday I fitted some winter tyres to my gravel bike, and I've had the idea to test them out by cycling the entire length of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, a full 46 miles from here to Stourport on Severn. In November.
Are you mad?
Yes, maybe a little bit, but it's going to be an adventure. We start our journey by heading under the footbridge and away from the village of Great Haywood, once the home of J.R.R. Tolkien. On the right hand side is a large wharf, which would have been very important in the days when this canal was used for industry. On the right hand side you'll also find a couple of historical buildings, including the wharfinger's house, where the manager of the wharf used to reside, and an old corn mill that was powered by the River Trent that we're about to pass over. The River Trent at this point is far from navigable, so the Trent and Mersey Canal has a long way to go before it actually joins the River Trent. The first few miles of towpath on the canal are really well surfaced and make for very enjoyable riding as we make our way around the edge of Stafford. I'm absolutely loving the autumn colours along the canal today. Everything is looking very pretty, if not a bit slippy with all these leaves on the ground. At Tixall we come across the first of 43 locks that we're going to have to navigate our way through today. And a lot of them still have wonderfully preserved lock keepers' cottages next to them, and this one is no exception. The good news for us as we're travelling south is that there are 12 locks that go up and 31 locks that go down, so there's more downhill than uphill on this ride. But as you can see by the elevation profile, this being a canal, it really is a pretty flat ride. The canal achieves its fairly flat course by following the course of river valleys for most of its length. This was a trait of James Brindley, who was the chief engineer behind the canal. He is well known for creating contour canals, which follow the lay of the land as much as possible. This avoided having to have extensive embankments and cuttings, although you will see later in the ride, it didn't completely remove the need for this type of feature. The first 4 miles of the canal follows the route of the River Severn, but at Weeping Cross, where the River Penk meets the River Severn, the canal takes a sharp left-hand turn and heads southwards, continuing its course alongside the River Penk. It's not far from there that we come across a really interesting spot on the canal, where a restoration project is in full swing. Volunteers here are working hard to re-establish a waterway link into the centre of Stafford. Back in 1816 there was a basin here with a lock system which allowed boats to leave the Stafford and Worcestershire Canal and make their way through the river system into the centre of Stafford. The link fell into disuse in the early 1900s and the connection was blocked off in 1929. The basin and its locks were then filled in the 1970s, and this is what the volunteers are hoping to re-establish, allowing canal boats back into the centre of Stafford. Progress on the basin is going well, and once the basin is complete they hope to start work on the bridge that will allow boats to pass under the towpath and into the basin. Moving on from that restoration project, the towpath does deteriorate, and after passing under the A34 and past the mini dealership, there was one part where it does become particularly narrow. But as we head further south and away from Stafford, the bank does get much wider. Although the towpath isn't particularly wide, it is rather well established here. I can imagine in the summer this can get quite overgrown before it's had a trim, but right now it's making for really pleasant riding. The towpath does deteriorate further as we make our way further out of Stafford. Approaching Deptmore Lock there was quite a muddy section, and I was grateful that I had these winter tyres on with slightly more aggressive tread than the ones that came with the bike. This is the second lock on our journey so far, and like Tixall Lock it has a wonderfully preserved lock keeper's cottage. As we move on past Deptmore Lock and further south, the towpath continues to be this narrow muddy track. However, the week before I cycled this we haven't really had much rain, so it's actually not as bad as it could be. I did say at the start, by doing this in November I might be a little bit mad, but actually I chose today because there hadn't been any rain in a while, and with it being November, I wasn't likely to have any problems with the towpath being overgrown. So if you are thinking about doing this, my advice would be do it when there's not been rain in a while, and do it after you know the canal and river trust have been down here with their strimmers, or do it later in the year like me when you know the vegetation is not going to be a problem. As we pass through Acton Trussell, around 7 miles into our journey, the towpath does improve a little with a gravel surface, and even a gravel road that forms an access path to a few properties along the canal. But as we carry on south towards Penkridge, with the canal continuing to shadow the River Penk as we head further south, we come to the worst bit of towpath so far on our journey. The section of the canal that runs alongside Teddersley Road has the worst section of towpath yet. It's very muddy here and very bumpy. As you can see, I'm going quite slowly at the moment, and some of the towpath is quite close to the canal and also angled on a slant down towards the canal as well, making this quite a difficult bit of towpath to navigate down. I was tempted just to hop over the barrier and carry on down the road, but I set out to ride down the canal, so that's what I shall do. Just before reaching Penkridge, we cross paths with the M6 motorway. Now this obviously wasn't here when the canal was built, but fortunately they built this bridge over it when this section was built in the 1960s. The M6 is actually the longest motorway in the United Kingdom, running 230 miles from the Midlands, where it leaves the M1 at junction 19, all the way up to the Scottish border. Now with this being a modern bridge, we have a lovely concrete towpath underneath, and this was an appreciated relief from the bumpy towpath that we'd just been cycling on. From the M6 bridge, it's not far till we make it into Penkridge. Heading into Penkridge, we again get a nice wide gravel towpath, and as we head under the bridge in the centre of Penkridge, we get a lovely little tunnel to make our way through as we head up lock number 6 of the journey so far. Now you might assume that Penkridge takes its name from the River Penk, but actually the opposite is true. The River Penk takes its name from the village of Penkridge. Now nobody seems to be exactly sure why the village is called Penkridge, although it is possible it was named after a nearby Roman fort called Penacrucium. And the name of the village was attested to centuries before the name of the river, so we can be certain that the river was named after the village, not the village after the river. The good quality towpath continues all the way through Penkridge until we head under Wolgarston Way, when after that we're back to the mud towpath that we've had previously, although it's still better than the majority of the towpath we had between Stafford and Penkridge. Not long after leaving Penkridge, we come across an old bridge that crosses over the canal. And this is a disused train line. It ran from the main line at Penkridge to Littleton Colliery at Huntington. The colliery was actually the last working coal mine on Cannock Chase, and it closed in 1993, and this railway line went with it. There did used to be a wharf here where coal could be transferred from the trains to the canal, but unfortunately that was built over with the construction of the M6 in the 60s. Moving on from the bridge, the canal becomes unusually straight as it runs alongside the M6 motorway. I suspect the canal was realigned when the M6 motorway was built to save them having to keep building bridges over the top. However, I can't find anything to support that this was actually done. Just the fact that James Brindley's canals were never usually this straight, and the fact that it's next to the motorway makes me think that this is what happened. If you know for sure either way, please do let me know in the comments. Now it's interesting that the canal here runs alongside the M6, because when the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal was built, it was one of the major routes of the canal age, just like the M6 when it was built, forming one of the major routes of the motorway network. The canal formed part of James Brindley's Grand Cross Plan for waterways across England, aiming to link the ports of Hull, Liverpool, Bristol and London. The Trent Mersey Canal, as well as the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, formed the biggest part of this plan, with the Trent Mersey Canal linking Liverpool to Hull, and then the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal making that link from the Trent Mersey down to the River Severn, where boats could then proceed to Bristol. There was also the Thames and Severn Canal, which ran from Gloucestershire on the River Severn over to the River Thames, making that link to London. After heading past Robaston Lock, which I believe is the 10th lock on our journey so far, the canal begins to regain its trademark James Brindley curls as it starts to curve away from the M6, and we can enjoy a bit more peace and quiet away from the roar of the motorway. However, it's not long before we're passing under another major road, and that is the A5, or Watling Street, which we pass under at Gailey and head up another lock. That lock being Gailey Top Lock, here with its wonderful toll house still in place. The toll houses were built multiple floors high, so the lockkeeper could have a good view down the canal of the traffic approaching the lock. You wouldn't find toll houses at every lock along a canal, but they were placed at important spots, and this being where the A5 crosses paths with the canal was considered important enough to have a toll house. At Four Ashes we pass under a bridge which is looking a little worse for wear, but considering that this section of canal was opened in 1772, I don't think we can blame the bridge for needing a little bit of attention. The idea for the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, along with the Trent Mersey Canal, were both promoted to Parliament in the same year, and they received their Acts of Parliament on the same day, the 14th of May 1766, which allowed construction to begin on both canals. The southern section of the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal was completed in 1771, with the northern section, from Wolverhampton to Great Haywood, being completed in the following year. We're now entering the Four Ashes Industrial Estate and approaching a rather ominous sign. Makes me a little nervous about cycling through here, to be honest. This is the SI Chemical Works, and with all the pipes over the top of the canal and all the chimneys and pipework on the right, it's all a bit Mad Maxy. I was definitely grateful to be back out in the countryside once passing the works and enjoying some tranquil riding again. Not far from Four Ashes we come across Hatherton Marina. This is where the now derelict Hatherton Canal joined on to the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal. Now just a short navigable arm, it's used for mooring boats, but it once connected to the Cannock Extension Canal, and it was completed in 1863, rather late in terms of the canal world. The branch was used heavily by traffic from the Cannock coalfields, which were ironically part of its demise, as subsidence from mining affected the use of the canal. In 1955 it was abandoned, and parts of its route were destroyed by open cast mining. Past Hatherton Marina, we come to the worst part of Towpath on the entire canal. It's very close to the water, very uneven and very muddy. You'd be a bit daft to try and cycle along this, so here's me making my way through it. Fortunately, I didn't end up in the canal, and the section that is particularly bad is pretty short, and we're soon back onto a much better towpath. Between Four Ashes and Cross Green we're on a particularly bendy bit of canal. As James Brindley made the canal follow the lay of the land as much as possible, avoiding the use of large embankments and cuttings, and also locks, and he did a particularly good job on this section, because this is known as the 10-mile pound. From Gailey Top Lock down to Compton in Wolverhampton, we don't pass through a single lock. This is also the summit of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. From here to Stourport it's all downhill, but it also means that this is the section of canal that requires the most water, and this is stored in 3 reservoirs where the A5 and M6 cross paths. It's fed into the canal via the Hatherton Branch Canal, which is now disused, but is still used as a feeder canal to bring the water from the reservoirs into this summit pound. As we approach the M54 motorway, the towpath is generally pretty good. I'm not talking a smooth tarmac surface or even a gravel surface, but it's generally pretty smooth underneath these leaves. I can imagine the only issue along here might be in summer, when the towpath hasn't been trimmed and the grass could get pretty long. If you're enjoying this video, please do give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. It makes a massive difference and is completely free. If you're really enjoying this video, you can buy me a beer via the link in the video description. Just before we pass under the M54 motorway, We come to the first of a few anti-access gates. Now for me, I'm on a normal bicycle and it's not loaded up with any heavy panniers. I'm fit and healthy, relatively, so I'm able to take my bike through rather easily. But for many people, this would be extremely difficult or impossible. I quite often ride with a child trailer. That would not go through that barrier. It would require disconnection and 2 people to carry it over the gate. Absolutely unacceptable in my opinion. Now I know people will point out that there is a radar key operated gate there, but if you're in a wheelchair and you're coming down here, or a mobility scooter, you have to get out to open the gate to get through. What exactly are you meant to do? They don't make sense to me. They don't stop these new wave of electric motorcycles, often incorrectly referred to as e-bikes, and they're just pointless. This is the first one I've seen on the canal, and fully enough, the whole northern end of the canal, I haven't seen a motorbike on the canal, which these barriers are designed to stop. They're pointless, they're inconvenient, and they're anti-access. They should be got rid of. Rant over. On a more positive note, we're now on a gravel surface since passing that barrier, and about to pass under the M54 motorway. The M54 is a 23-mile motorway that links the M6 to Telford, Shropshire. The first part was constructed in 1975, and the complete motorway as we know it today was finished in 1983. As we head into the northern part of Wolverhampton, we carry on through a rather industrial part of the city. On the right hand side is a large Jaguar Land Rover production plant, which was opened in 2014, and carries on Jaguar and Land Rover's connection with the West Midlands. In my Brummie Loop video, we passed by another one of its plants in Solihull. After passing through the industrial area, we come to the Orthley Narrows, or Penderford Rockin as the boatmen used to call it. This section of canal cuts through a 600-metre section of a sandstone outcrop. Brindley couldn't avoid bringing the canal through here, so to save on cost for the cutting, the canal was built narrower with just a couple of passing places along this 600-metre narrow stretch. The route here veers away from the River Penk and heads into the Smestow Valley, taking us from the Trent watershed into the Severn watershed. We emerge out of the Narrows at Penderford, and the towpath veers away from the side of the canal and heads down the side of this housing estate. I'm not sure this can technically be called a towpath at this point, but it is the closest path to the canal, so I'm going to use it. It feels a bit strange being in an urban area again, as the canal up until this point has pretty much been rural, but we now have a busy few miles as the canal makes its way through Wolverhampton. The path heads back alongside the canal just before we get to Orthley Junction. This is where the Shropshire Union Canal meets the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. The Shropshire Union Canal was originally called the Birmingham and Liverpool Junction Canal, and when it was opened in 1835 it provided a quicker and easier route up to the River Mersey than using the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal and the Trent Mersey Canal. This was the second major blow to traffic on the canal, as in 1815 the Worcester and Birmingham Canal had opened, providing a much quicker route from Birmingham down to the River Severn. However, boats heading north towards the River Mersey from Birmingham did at least have to use a half-a-mile stretch of the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal, from Aldersley Junction, where the Birmingham Main Line Canal meets this one, up until Orthley Junction, where boats could turn off onto the Shropshire Union Canal and make their way to the River Mersey. To make the best of this situation, the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal put very high tolls on boats using this section of canal. They only reduced the tolls when the Birmingham Canal Company threatened to build another canal linking the Shropshire Union Canal to the Birmingham Main Line Canal. In between these two important canal junctions, we pass under two rather splendid looking viaducts. The first carries the main line between Birmingham and Shrewsbury, and the second is now disused, as it used to carry the South Staffordshire Railway between Wolverhampton and Dudley, some of which we cycled on my Black Country Loop video. At Aldersley Junction you have the option to turn left and head down the Birmingham Main Line Canal, which would take you through Wolverhampton city centre and down to Birmingham city centre. But we're obviously going to carry on straight and continue our journey down the Staffs and Worcester Canal towards Stourport on Severn. The towpath down here is a tarmac towpath, and as we make our way towards Tetnall we head under another disused rail bridge. This was a small branch line branching off the main South Staffordshire Railway. The towpath then moves to a gravel surface as we pass Tetnall, and we pass under what was the main line of the South Staffordshire Railway. At Compton we come to the first of 31 locks that we need to make our way down. Now Compton Lock is significant because it was actually the first lock to be built on the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal, and also the first lock built by James Brindley. It is considered to be the prototype for all narrow locks across the West Midlands. The towpath continues with this lovely gravel surface as we make our way past Whittick Mill Lock and Whittick Locks, which come in close succession to each other, before we finally leave Wolverhampton and head out yet again into the countryside. As we leave Wolverhampton, we do unfortunately leave the nice gravel towpath behind, and although it's not a gravel surface here, it is a really well established path, and much better than some of the towpath section we saw earlier in the ride. We're now just over 25 miles into this ride, with just over 20 to go, to complete the full 46 miles of the canal. It's an uneventful few miles as we make our way through the countryside, before we come to Dimmingdale Lock, where the towpath crosses sides. And once crossed over, we again get a nice gravel surface, as the canal continues through the countryside, making its way south towards Wombourne, or as I was told on my Black Country Loot video, is more locally pronounced as Wombourne. It's a really nice section of canal to cycle down, through some really pleasant open countryside, which makes me wonder why some of the locals have such long faces. As we approach Wombourne, the fantastic lockkeeper's cottage at Bratch Locks comes into view. The canal descends sharply from here, down a set of 3 locks. We also have the second original toll house that we've seen on the route so far. Here you can see it popping above the top lock to give that lockkeeper a view up and down the canal. It's a really pretty spot here, so I stop to have a few snacks and enjoy the view on a bench nicely placed at the top of the locks. In the middle of Wombourne we come past Bumblehole Lock. The Canal and River Trust are currently carrying out some work on the lock gates here, so the canal is closed to boat traffic at this point, but fortunately for us the towpath remains open, and we can carry on through Wombourne, past Giggity Wharf and under Giggity Lane. Between Wombourne and Swindon, the towpath continues to be a nice wide gravel track. At Botherham there's a set of 2 locks and a staircase, continuing the descent of the canal down towards the River Severn. The lovely gravel riding continues as we make our way through Swindon and out into the countryside. Continuing south we head past Hinksford, Green Forge and past Ashwood Marina, which is a rather pleasant spot on the canal. As we pass Ashwood Marina, unfortunately we do lose this gravel surface. The towpath from here down to Stourport is still rather well established, if not a solid surface. There are a few bumpy sections, but I had no problems getting down here. The canal takes us over the top of the River Stour before we reach Stourton Junction. Now you would think, with the river being called the River Stour and Stourbridge not being far away, that this junction and town would be called Stourton, but it is in fact pronounced Stourton, and I was corrected on this on my Black Country Loot video, yet another place name that I'd incorrectly pronounced. This junction is where the Stourbridge Canal meets the Staffs and Worcestershire Canal. This would have been a busy junction back during the Industrial Revolution, with boats loaded with coal, ironstone and limestone all passing through here. We're coming to the home straight now. We've got about 12 miles to go to Stourport from here. with the canal vaguely following the route of the River Stour all the way down to the River Severn. The towpath is generally pretty good from here, and we can make decent progress. The last major trade traffic was on this southern section of canal, as coal was transported from Cannock down to a power station at Stourport until it closed in 1949. The canal was nationalised in 1948, and plans to close it were made in 1959. Fortunately, it was saved by a volunteer group, the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal Society, and in 1968 the canal was reclassified as a cruiseway, and the following year the entire length of the canal was declared a conservation area, which has resulted in historical buildings and structures being retained and improved, including the lock here, Stourport Lock, which will go down just before we pass under the A458. And those with a keen eye will also notice the original octagonal toll house at Stourport Wharf. Before we get to Kinver, we come across the first of two tunnels on the canal. Now, James Brindley did his best to make sure he didn't have to build things like this, but the southern section of this canal has quite a few cuttings and two tunnels which couldn't be avoided. Dunsley Tunnel is the first and shorter of the two tunnels, and at just 21 metres long, it's actually the shortest tunnel on the British canal system. But more importantly, it's believed that it's actually the first tunnel that is still operational on the British canal system, so a fairly important spot. Heading through Kinver, there's a homemade sign that seems to direct cyclists away from the towpath and down a road that runs parallel. There's also a couple of canal and river trust signs that seem to back up the fact that that section of towpath is not open to cyclists for whatever reason. We're soon able to rejoin the towpath proper and make our way out of Kinver and into some beautiful countryside in between Kinver and Kookley. The canal and the surrounding woodland was really looking resplendent today with its autumn colours. I really did enjoy this section of riding. The quality of the towpath has deteriorated a little bit. It's no longer a wide gravel track, but it's still well established and pleasant to ride on. Before we get to Kookley, we pass the Staffordshire and Worcestershire border, which is marked nicely by this stone, which was erected in 1999. Shortly afterwards we arrive in Kookley, and the Kookley Tunnel, the second tunnel on this canal. It passes through yet another sandstone outcrop, of which we see a lot of on this southern section of the canal. It's 65 yards long, or 59 metres, and unusually for early canal tunnels, it has a towpath, just like the Dunsey Tunnel did. Although it looks pretty dark on camera in there, it's light enough to be able to cycle through without lights, and the towpath is fairly flat. Just outside of Kookley we come to Debdale Lock, which has another example of a fantastic lockkeeper's cottage, but it also has an interesting feature in the sandstone next to the lock. The rock has been excavated to form a chamber, and apparently during the height of the canal's use, when horses were commonplace, it was used as a stable. As we head towards the outskirts of Kidderminster, the canal heads through quite a few deep cuttings, with steep sandstone walls. But as we approach Kidderminster and come to the outskirts, the landscape begins to open up again, and as we head down Wolverley Court Lock, we lose the nice gravel towpath that we've had, and we again have to deal with a bit of mud as we make our way into Kidderminster Centre. Fortunately, that muddy section is rather short, and we're soon back on a nice gravel surface, as we make our way through a housing estate on the edge of Kidderminster town centre. Kidderminster Lock drops the canal down just before it passes under the ring road that encircles Kidderminster town centre. I was a bit confused here because it looked like the towpath ended, and I thought I might have to cross the road. But fortunately that's not the case here. We can double back on ourselves and head down a towpath on the other side of the canal to carry on under the ring road. This brings us out right in the centre of Kidderminster, right next to the main shopping area, and next to this fantastic old building with its chimney. This building is Slingfield Mill and Britain's chimney. In the mid-1800s, Kidderminster became famous for its carpet making, and this was one of many factories churning out carpets in the area. Having the canal in the area was a huge boost to the industry, being able to bring in the raw materials and ship out the finished products around the country and the world. We're now closing in on our final destination of Stourport. It's just 4 miles from Kidderminster to the end of the canal where it meets the River Severn. During these final few miles we pass under the Severn Valley Railway twice. The first at the Falling Sands Viaduct in Kidderminster itself. This carries the current Heritage Line to Kidderminster Station. This was actually originally a branch line of the Severn Valley Line, with the main line carrying on south towards Hartlebury. The final few miles to Stourport are dispatched rather quickly, as the towpath is of really good quality and a nice surface to ride on. In Stourport we pass under the second viaduct of the Severn Valley Railway. This one is now disused, but was originally part of the main line between Shrewsbury and Hartlebury. After cycling through Stourport we come to York Street Lock, which is the lock that drops the canal down into the Stourport basins. Unfortunately there's not a towpath here to take us under the bridge and next to the basins, so there is a little bit of road riding here to take us to the very end of the canal. It's just 100 metres or so down the road and we get a great look at Stourport basins. There's 5 basins here that make up what is an inland port. Stourport only exists because of the canal and these basins. Before the canal was built there was a few houses here, but after construction of the canal and its terminus here, a town grew up around these basins, where raw materials and finished products were transferred between narrowboats for the canals and riverboats capable of navigating the Severn. From here it's a short ride down to the River Severn. We descend a couple of sets of locks which are designed to allow riverboats up into the basins, much wider than the narrow locks on the canal, to make that transfer of goods between boats much easier. At the bottom of the locks is the River Severn. And that's it. In the fading light we've made it to the River Severn and completed the full 46 miles of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. I very much hope you've enjoyed the video and found it useful, and hopefully it's inspired you to ride some of this canal. Please consider subscribing to the channel. It makes a massive difference and is absolutely free. And if you want to buy me a beer to say thanks for the video, you can do that via the link in the video description. I'll leave the Garmin Connect and Komoot route maps to this in the video description, although it is just following the canal the whole way. Thank you very much for watching and happy cycling.